Good morning and welcome to DTC Wine Workshops webinar series featuring Carl Giavanti, Winery PR and Media Outreach Specialist. Welcome, Carl.
Welcome, Sandra. Thank you.
Absolutely. Look forward to a lively conversation today as Carl presents best practices around winery PR and media outreach. So just a quick introduction. Let's go ahead and share Carl's bio to better understand his background and areas of specialty. So Carl's joined the DTC Consultant Network with over 20 years building relationships with business executives in many industries and companies really of all sizes. Carl joined the wine industry in 2009, and since that time has supported several wineries, mainly in the Northwest, but throughout the nation. You'll find here in Carl's bio that he has extensive contacts and extensive background in the winery PR sector. He spent many years on his own of tasting and hearing technical questions asked by others. And so this really gave him the skill sets necessary to best support wineries of small to mid-size. And so now he's worked with over 50 wineries. And today we're going to learn more best practices from Carl for wineries interested in improving PR and media outreach. You'll also find on the DTC Wine Workshops page, Carl does have an introductory offer for any new client with a 1-hour complimentary consultation. So for just all of you joining today, just one quick comment. We will run through Carl's introductory webinar, and please allow 5 minutes for Q&A at the end. A great time to jot down any notes you might have during the webinar and get your questions asked directly from Carl. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Carl Giavanti.
Great, Sandra. Thanks very much. I'll go ahead and bring up my slides, and we'll get started here. This presentation is about basically how winery PR is changing. Title of the presentation, I think, is pretty provocative: Winery PR in a Pay-to-Play World. And what do wineries need to do about it? What do wineries need to do to get brand recognition in a market like this? So the two biggest factors that we're going to discuss are, number one, the scarcity of quality wine writers out there, and number two, the amount of competition that we have as wineries today. I think in the United States alone, we're well over 8,000 wineries. So let's talk about what we need to do about that. Sandra did a nice job of with your comments. I appreciate that on my background, and just wanted to highlight a couple of things. I was 20 years in tech sales, marketing, and project management, but in 2009, I did transition to starting a D2C wine marketing consultancy. Worked with over 50 small to medium-sized wineries in the last 7 years, including about 11 winery clients that I've worked with since 2012 when I started doing PR consulting. Well, why did I join the D2C Consultant Network? Quite frankly, there were no other publicists, so it was a no-brainer for me. And I do see marketing and PR as very complementary disciplines. The objective, of course, of PR is to build brand awareness, but it's also to provide content on the marketing side. So let's take a moment, if you'll indulge me, and talk about the importance of content. There are 3 types of content. I know you've heard this from your D2C consultant partners, the importance of content. But let's go through it very, very briefly. Owned, paid, and earned content, which I'll talk about as owned media, paid media, and earned media. Footnoted, traditionally not paid for earned media, but that is changing. That is the point of this presentation. We're in a pay-to-play world. So the content that you own, your owned media, that's your website, social media, your blog, photos, video. You're the author of those. You manage and maintain that content. Very, very critical. Paid media is the content that you buy. You pay for advertising, Occasionally you pay for label placement if you happen to get great scores or medals from competition. But if you want to expand your reach beyond the subscribers that you already have, the followers that you already have in social media, then it's the content that you earn from third-party sources, your third-party endorsements by wine writers or other media, essentially your accolades. This is the area of earned media that I think is critical, and it's also the area where I think I can add the most value. So getting into the presentation, I'll make a bold statement here, tongue-in-cheek, but not so much. The days of being discovered by the wine writing community are virtually over. Are new brands being discovered? Well, yes, but there's so much competition out there that it is very difficult, and there are fewer wine writers, fewer outlets. So let's talk about some of the factors involved in getting earned media coverage for your brand. Well, we see a decline in the number of print media outlets. There are less newspapers, less traditional media, fewer wine columns, columns being canceled. We see fewer A-list writers. Years ago, I think when I started this, there were probably 80 to 100 in the country. Today, by some informed estimates, there are 30 or 40 in the country. So we have a transition, of course, from print to online, and this emergence of online writers is really critical. It is the largest and most approachable community that we have out there. Resultant of all this is we're kind of moving into more of a pay-to-play reality where wineries have additional costs and need to invest to get attention given the number of wineries that are out there. And let's talk about the number of wineries that are out there today. It's virtually doubled in the last 10 years. So, you know, brand building and selling wine 20 years ago was much easier. I think most of you would agree. Less competition, there were more distributors. I mean, look at the spread here. 2,600 wineries in 1995, 3,000 distributors. Probably wasn't too difficult to get distributed locally, regionally, nationally. Probably would not have been uncommon to have 100% of your production allocated to wholesalers. Fast forward today, 2015, we've got a little bit of an inverse carafe going on here. 8,800 wineries seeking distribution from about 700 distributors. My goodness, with the consolidation of distributors and the consolidation of their books and focus on larger brands, it truly is much, much more difficult than it ever has been to get the attention from distributors. And this is really one of the big reasons why direct-to-consumer marketing and the direct-to-consumer consultant network is so important, and why winery PR have also been become so important. You know, getting your brand to stand out in the marketplace really requires creative branding. It requires best practice direct marketing, and it requires a lot of media outreach. So we'll talk about those factors here next. All right. So getting coverage for your brand. We've established that journalism as a whole is moving from print to digital, print to online, and there's tremendous competition for media attention. So here's some of the options. Here's some of the channels that you should consider. You may be doing some of these. I know many small wineries are not doing these types of activities comprehensively. But let's go through some of these very, very briefly. Advertorials is, you know, simply a blend of advertising and editorial. You're basically paying for your third-party endorsements. Submitting wines for competitions, submitting wines to be scored, sending wines to writers for their online sites, getting writers to visit you, and you visiting writers on market trips are to me the 6 best practice areas that we should be focused on. And by the way, All of these have associated costs. And as we go through this presentation, please begin to think of those costs as an investment in brand building. Okay, so let's talk about some of the ways we can do outreach to the wine media. This first one, advertorials, frankly, I'm not a big fan or advocate, but the lines have been blurred a little bit, and we are living in a pay-to-play world, so paying for advertising to get editorial in magazines is not an unreasonable thing to do or to consider as part of your overall budget. I'm not picking on touring and tasting because they actually it is a beautifully produced magazine. It's quite obviously advertorial. You know, you pay and they will write an article with beautiful photos in a glossy magazine. And, you know, I think most consumers realize this is truly advertorial, not editorial, but some don't. The savvy folks do. Magazines like this and others that maybe don't have a strict church and state policy related to advertising and editorial can be worth considering if your distribution, if your wine is distributed locally and you have a tasting room and this publication happens to be distributed in your area, it may be worth considering this as a small part of your overall budget. There are many, many other print publications. Touring and tasting is just really one example. Again, I'm not a big advocate, but it is a channel or a consideration. Moving forward, competitions. I think all wineries have submitted wines for competitions. You know, the question that I'm asking today: do these medals really influence purchase decisions? There seems to be, to me, more and more of these competitions. They keep popping up. Everyone has a competition. They're growing in popularity, but I'm not sure who really is benefiting. Is it the wineries that are winning the medals, or is it the competition sponsors that are collecting fees? Well, you know, we are in a pay-to-play world, and I've noticed that everyone seems to be a winner in many of these competitions with double platinum and double gold and silver, and there's so many different opportunities to win a medal. You know, I'm not really sure a double bronze is going to impress anyone, but and there is a cost. Of course, you pay per wine submitted, and then of course, if you get a double platinum or double gold, you'll have an opportunity to advertise these winning medals and hang them on your bottles in your tasting room. There is a role for competitions, in my opinion, and they can be worth doing. I think there's a half a dozen, maybe 8, 10 tops in the country that are worth considering. And the real question is there marketing value? Is there residual marketing value provided by sponsors, you know, by the folks that put on the competition? Sunset Magazine is a great example. They have a beautiful print publication. They have a beautiful online site. They do newsletter marketing. They announce the results on social media. The amount of coverage and exposure with a magazine like Sunset, and there are about 8 or 10 others that I consider valuable, are considerable. So it's a matter of being selective, I think. You know, another factor on competitions, if you're a developing wine region, if you're a very small brand getting started, and you want to see how your wines compare to others in a specific category, might be worth considering. If part of your marketing plan is to support or have a retail strategy, having a medal can be something helpful for retailers, for floor signage, for instance, or for shelf talkers, again, if this is part of your overall marketing plan. So competition should be evaluated carefully. Okay, wine scorers. This is sort of the holy grail, if you will. Everyone wants to be highly rated by the big 6 publications. And I mean, you know, the reach and the impact can be immediate and significant. the big issue is, of course, there are many, many more wineries submitting wines these days. I've spoken recently to Advocate and Enthusiast, and they both estimate about 1,000 wines per month coming through the door for evaluation. In fact, it's become so competitive that some of these publications are screening wines prior to even accepting samples. Currently, Spectator and Advocate have those policies. So it's become very, very competitive. And of course, I wonder about score inflation. It used to be that an 89 or a 90 and 88 point score from one of the big 6 publications was impressive. Today, I personally am looking for scores above 92 to really market those things. And in terms of pay to play, some of the publications will offer you the opportunity for label placement. In other words, in addition to sending the wines, if you really want your wine to stand out, or if you really want your wine to show up in the print publication, you may have to opt for paying to present a label in the publication. So again, the pay-to-play theme. Here's where you do want to focus on getting scores, and it's really about your distribution sales team. I mean, distribution organizations care about, in my opinion, they care about only 3 things. And I hate to admit it, but it seems, and people may argue this, but I believe distribution folks really want to know, how's the wine, what's the price to us, and what are the scores? They really don't care about feature articles. They really don't care about social media hits. They're really interested in the wine, the quality, and have you submitted and gotten scores. So if you're distributed, having this submitting for scores really needs to be part of your strategy. Moving on to online reviews. Huge community of online writers these days. Many traditional print journalists are now doing podcasts, have their own sites. Many publications now are online only. There's a huge wine bloggers community. Vetting them, of course, is very, very important. Consumers really do still appreciate independent opinions about wine quality. So this group is growing. I estimate 800 to 1,000 writers of varying quality around the United States. Understanding who they are is really, really critical. Your investment in sending wines out to be reviewed online, or to be reviewed and hopefully posted online, is the cost of samples, shipping, identifying the time to identify those writers, develop relationships, doing the follow-up, and knowing who has a palate preference for your type of wine or a story interest in your type of winery is really critical. But there's a huge community out there and a very significant group to consider. Getting writers to visit your site in person is absolutely golden. Getting them to tour with you, taste, sending them a media kit so they can prep to interview you, telling your story, your unique stories. If you have lodging, having them as a captive audience on site at your vineyard, at your tasting room, at your winery. Absolutely special and exclusive and private access. There's nothing better than this. So creating a target media list that's realistic. For most of you, the gentleman featured here, pictured here, probably wouldn't be a realistic target for you. But identifying those individuals and inviting them out and pursuing them until they visit your region is really one of the best things that you can do to develop an audience with these folks. So market trips, the 6th and final piece. These are often overlooked. Why not set up tastings with local writers when you're visiting their city and you're working with your distributor? You can do this in your hotel room. You could visit them at their office, taste them over lunch. It's so critical to develop a local presence for your brand. Try to get some coverage. Try to develop some new consumers who can, by the way, buy from you online. But really the key here is creating some distributor support from local media. And by the way, leveraging the cost of your trip. You're going to be doing ride-alongs anyway, 9 to 5, typically with most distributors. Here's a way to maximize your time in the market and your costs. All right, so starting to wrap up here. Although each of the 6 media outreach areas that we just covered have costs, and in many cases they are sort of a pay-to-play situation. I think taking a balanced approach, seeing what works for you, really is important, and putting a plan in place to do some of these things. Diversify, identify where you're being successful, make adjustments to your plan, update your plan often. Tracking total media impressions from your efforts from all these different areas is really critical. At about the same time, did those media hits drive traffic to your tasting room? Did they drive traffic to your website? Are you getting additional visits and page views? Are people sharing and commenting on social media? I mean, really track when these things come out, and these reviews and mentions and scores and competitions. Are people signing up at about the same time for your newsletter? Are you getting more social follows? Most importantly, are you getting additional wine sales? Because at the end of the day, the end game is to increase your brand's visibility, right? And getting in front of the wine media will help you do that, because it'll increase awareness with their readers, with other consumers, which eventually will translate to increased sales. So I want to thank all of you for your time. If you have questions, happy to answer them. And at this point, I'll turn it back to Sandra.
Thank you so much, Carl. What an informative presentation that was. I have found myself jotting down quite a few notes here, and really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to share with us such a wealth of knowledge today. And I do have a few questions I would love to run past you from the audience. Do you have a few minutes to answer?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the first question we're getting is, don't most wineries already do these things?
Well, that's a great question. And, the answer, Sandra, is yes and no. And it depends, right? There's a lot of gray areas when we talk about this stuff. I think the larger wineries certainly do. They have marketing staff, they have communications professionals. These are best practices that have been out there for years and years, and they have the capacity to do these things. Smaller to mid-sized wineries, they're not as consistent. They don't allocate time. They can't do these things, and it really is just due to capacity restraints. They need assistance. They need a part-time FTE. They need to outsource some consulting, whatever it is, because it does really require a full attention focus to do these things well. But it really should be part of everyone's strategic planning and activities, in my opinion.
Okay, great. So next question here. What are the 2 top things that wineries can start doing on their own?
Well, I think that wineries do many of these things, frankly. I think submitting wines to the big 6 publications for scores, entering some competitions are really important. The key thing is tracking deadlines, getting editorial calendars, and then these days following the submission rules, whether you're submitting to a publication competition or sending wines to a writer who writes online. Being aware of the rules of engagement has become really, really critical. Developing relationships and having a little database, contact information is really critical. Maybe putting together a sample submission list with a schedule and calendar would be some really good best practice focus areas to to incorporate into your plan.
Okay, great. All wonderful tips. And so final question, I just love this one. It's like the $1,000,000 question. Which wine writers should wineries contact?
Right. You're right. That is the ultimate question. Absolutely. And the ultimate answer, of course, Sandra, is that it depends. It really depends on your story, how unique your brand is, the types of wine that you make. The reality is that each and every writer out there has publisher requirements, timeline requirements. They have their own story interests. They have palate preferences that you need to be aware of. So, we develop target media lists that we think identify best fit writers to pitch for our clients. I'm using a database of about 1,200 wine writers. And if we add in food and wine and travel, you get to about well over 2,000 folks. And just vetting those and having a list of writers that you want to reach out to that are a good fit, that are a best fit for your brand and for your wines is really critical. That's a great question. Difficult one to answer, though.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure spending time with you today, Carl Giavanti, Winery PR and Media Outreach Specialist. Thank you so much for your time, and audience. Thank you for taking time out to join us in today's DTC Wine Workshops introductory webinar. You will find this recorded webinar available through the DTC Wine Workshops webpage. Look for our blog page, and that will be ready here in the next week. And also watch for our social channels, Facebook and Twitter updates to watch the recording from today's live webinar. Again, Carl Giavanti, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.